Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the latest in our series of webinars. Tonight, we will be doing a webinar on creating classes. Danielle Macklin will be leading the webinar. I would like to start out by thanking all of you again for joining us this evening. NUITEQ is very happy that so many of you come back each week to continue to learn more and more about Snowflake. We're going to get started. Thank you very much. Take it away, Danielle.
Thanks, Jack. Hi, everyone. Thanks again for coming. Today we're going to talk a little bit about how to create and manage your classes using Snow.live. For me in my classroom, this was definitely a game changer. I loved being able to have the same activities that students were playing with on the interactive panels, also being able to do on their own devices. So it was a really great feature. So I'm going to go ahead and start by sharing with you my screen. And there are 3 different ways to create and manage your classes. So from your main dashboard, you simply go to Classes and select Manage Students. So for the first time, this is where you'll go to create your classes. There are 3 different ways to create your classes. So I'll go through each of the 3 ways, adding a new class. So this would be like a manual entry, importing from Google Classroom, which is unbelievably easy, and then also importing a CSV. All of these are really easy to do and very easy to manage. So I'll start off with the manual entry. So as soon as you click the manual entry, you have the option to rename your class. So I'll call this Test Class 1. And then you have the option to add students into the class. So you can add students individually, or you can add students with a list. So I'm going to start with just a search. If I added this student individually, I then have the option. I can enter that student's individual email, or I can select student has no email. When I select that a student has no email, and I enter that individual student, so this would be really good for a lot of the younger students. I know at my former district, our students didn't have email until I think they were in about 3rd grade. So if you wanted to do this with your littles, this is a really great way to do it. Once you've created that and hit Add Student, you'll have a separate pop-up window appear. It says the new student was created. It'll say that you have successfully created a student account for the student's name. Their username is, and this is auto-generated, so their username is always going to be the same, but it's created just by the algorithm of the technology. And then there's also the auto-generated password. Students do have the ability to change the password after, and I'll show you how to go through that. So this is what students would do to click in or to sign in for the first time. One of the things that I want to suggest, if this is how you're creating your students, is I would suggest that you either take a screenshot of this pop-up window and then save it onto a Google Doc or a file so that you have the information, or copy and paste it into a file. The reason I'm suggesting that is once you click away, it disappears and we're unable to go back and see what the password may be. So my student has been created. They're now part of that class. Once that student's in the class, I can then see progress that they make. I'm just going to, for the sake of this, delete that student and remove them from this class. So maybe a student moved, they were no longer part of your roster, or they switched classes. This is how you would be able to remove that student. The other option, so you have your individual student, you can also import through a list. So this would just be a simple email list. So I would have likely copied and pasted all of my students' emails, added them to the list, and then add those students. Those students would then be notified by their email that you have added them to a class. And I'll walk you through what it looks like from a student perspective. I created a student test account just so I could see on my own what it would look like. And I heard the little pop, that means there may have been a question coming in. So as I'm transitioning, Jack, if you want to relay that over.
It's from Carolyn, and she said, can the auto-generated username or password be changed later?
The password can be changed later. The username for now stays the same. So that's not something that you can tweak. So that's why I definitely advise, once you've created it, to make sure that you do have the screenshots or that you've copied and pasted the info. When I did this with my 6th graders, my district had, at the time, set up a firewall, so they weren't able to receive any outside emails. And when I went through and added them to my class, I did the manual entry for all of them. And then I just copy and pasted. I had a little folder spreadsheet with all of their information. So like my student's name. And then I would paste in what their username was and then what their password was. And then I made sure that my student had a copy of that. I had a copy, and there was also a copy in my subfolder. I did also, the first time I created the accounts with my students, I made sure to set a good chunk of my day, or of my class day, to do that. I had my students we walked through a process of how to change passwords. And then I had my students write down their new password and then write it down on my notes so that we had the same. Just to make it a little easier, my students were pretty familiar with using just one password for all of their accounts. So that's if you're doing it individually. The other option is if you want to import from Google Classroom, and this is probably my favorite. I worked at a Google school, so it was really easy. And it was a simple click. And then it would show you all of your classes in your Google Classroom account. So right now I only have one class. As soon as I select it, it would appear. And then now I've already added that class, so it's already there. And it would show me all of the students that I have within that class. So I have my students here. It's also going to show me students who have already signed in. So if other teachers in the district are using it, it would show you the students have already signed in somewhere to an account so that they're able to access it as well.
Danielle?
Oh, yes.
Carolyn is asking, is there a way to show only active classes? She has several archived ones with similar names, so it's hard to tell which to select.
That is a good question. I'm assuming, Carol, that you're following along and doing this with me. So that's good, because that question is really helpful for me to figure out the answer to as well. As far as being able to see the archived classes, I would have to check. I would advise you to check with your district and see if there's a way to maybe I don't know if you could put those into a separate database so that they wouldn't appear in your archive. I'm understanding what you're asking. I'm just trying to articulate the best way to go about it. Because I know I had the same thing when I tried adding 8th graders. I saw all of my 8th grade classes for the last 6 years that I taught at the district appear. So, and since they were all the same names, it was a little confusing. That's a really good question. I don't know if I have the exact answer for it, other than I would advise you to check with your district about somehow trying to archive them, or possibly even delete it, maybe take out all the data that you want and then delete the class itself. I hope that's a good answer. I know, Kelly, you're on too. If you have a better solution, I'd love to hear from you too.
Kelly responded that they're going to try and figure it out at the district level.
Okay, great. All right. So before I go to the next part, are there any other questions?
There aren't at this point.
Okay, good. All right, so you have importing from Google Classroom. For me, I mean, it's easy for me. I only have the one class, so it was the only one that appeared. I will look into what to do though with archived classes. And then the last option for creating classes is importing with a CSV. I know a lot of districts have this as a way to organize student emails and with any other rostering that you might do with other apps or programs that students use. And it's a real simple. You select it, you go to your files. I have to find the CSV. I did my CSV in Google Sheets, and then I just saved it as a CSV file. But if you do Excel, if you do Google Sheets, any of those should be able to work. I'm importing.
Danielle, we do have a couple of questions.
Okay.
So what to do if not all the students who are in the class show up in Snowflake after importing? I have several classes showing up who have half or less of the students appearing. And then someone else said, I tried importing my Google Classroom roster, but only 5 students in the class show up.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I've never had that happen.
I've never had that happen.
I would actually recommend that maybe Kelly, because I believe both of you are from Hazelwood, so maybe Kelly could go over and check and see how you're doing it, because I've not seen that happen anywhere else, and I think maybe it's just something that's going on with your Google accounts. So if she would be able to check on that for you individually, that would be great.
Yes.
Go ahead, Danielle.
That would be my recommendation also. I know that when I first found out that this was a possibility on Snow.live that this existed, I was really excited. And when I tried creating my classes, I had the same thing. I tried importing from Google Classroom, but the firewall set up at my district made it so that I couldn't add in those students. So it was just something on the back end had to be tweaked a little bit, and then it seemed to work itself out after that. So yeah, I would suggest talking with your IT and seeing again what they would suggest. All right, so back to CSV. When importing a CSV file, you'll see that once I've imported the file, it's going to show me all of my students' names, which I had only put in as that for the students. It might also appear as their email addresses. So the only thing that will actually be looked at by the software when it's importing the CSV file will be the email itself. So it's possible too that the student name might appear just as their email address, in which case you do have the ability to go back. I could edit this student to student 15 or to whomever I wanted to rename that student as. I could fix that. And then same thing, it's going to default my class setting, and then I would just do my new class name. So class test 2. And now that class has existed. From there, again, I can go through, I can add in students individually, or I can import from a list. So I can see my example classes that I've created with my students in them. So from a student perspective, once a student has been added to a class, they will receive an email that their teacher has created a class and has added them to the class. And I'm going to take a second, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to just share with you what the student view looks like for that. Let me go ahead and get that open. I think we can see now, yep, the student confirmation screen. So students will receive an email, and oops, there we go. It'll come from Snowflake Web. So the email comes from the address of support@NUITEQ.com. So it's not actually from your email, it would be from the NUITEQ email. I would suggest, again, if needed, to check with your IT department if there's any firewalls set up. There's also the possibility that it might be sent to a spam folder. But it tells the student, your teacher created a Snowflake Web account for you, hello, and then the student's email. And then once the student opens the email, this is the message that they will have. So it'll say the teacher name or the name of the Snowflake class has created a new account for you and added you to the class. Here are your sign-in details. So they'll sign in with their email address, and then it auto-generates a first-time password. So once they select sign in now, they would put in their email address, and then I just copied and pasted the password to sign in. And then from there, they're able to edit their password. Yes.
Danielle?
Yes.
Will students get an email even if importing via Google Classroom?
Yes, they will. I learned that the hard way when I imported a bunch of old students that I had in 8th grade who were seniors, and they were wondering, like, Ms. Macklin, what are you doing? I don't want to join. Yeah, so they will get an email even if they're imported just from Google Classroom. And it's an email notification for the first time that they have to sign in or sign up for their account. Once you've created your account, you've basically created the student account once you've sent that class information. And then the students will then be able to log in with their credentials. So they will, if they're using Google Classroom or if you're doing a manual input, they'll receive the email for that.
We did have a question by Kimberly. If a student does not have an email attached and they lose their email, how will they be able to reset it? I know our district has outside emails for our elementary students blocked.
Yes.
So I can check with them to see if they will unblock, this particular address. But if they don't, I recall when I set up the classes, I left the email address off and just screenshotted the password and their username, and then that's what they use to log in.
Yep, that's one way to do it as well. So yeah, you're right on that. I know a lot of districts do have that restriction of students only being able to receive emails from people within their network, within their district.
Danielle?
Yes.
Will my students miss anything if I log into their student accounts to change their passwords? I teach first grade and want to simplify their login as much as possible.
So if they miss anything, I'm guessing, like, if you mean, will they lose any assignments that you've added to them, I'm thinking. No, I think if you wanted to go and like create their username and password and then using that manual entry, which was back, put that back up here. And then you wanted to, if you wanted to log in with their username, log in with their password, and then change their password to something that they remember, that shouldn't affect them at all after. You would just give them the new password. Yes.
You're not sharing your screen. If
I'm sorry. Sorry about that. I keep thinking I can go back and forth. Let's try that again. All right. So if I did the manual entry, can we see it now? Yes. Okay. If I did the manual entry, and it has my auto-generated student name. Usually the student name too is going to be the first little bit of their name, so the first couple letters. And then it just adds a series of numbers at the end. But yes, you could log in with their credentials and you could change their password.
Danielle, Don is asking, if adding students via import from Google Classroom, when do I see their password and username to screenshot it? I saw it pop up when you manually added them, but I'm not sure if I missed it when it shows up when adding via Google Classroom.
When you add via Google Classroom, they have to they get the email that sets it up for them. So that would be like the one caveat to it. So I'll go back to that. So yes, when you import from Google Classroom, I don't know if it'll let me import my class twice. Once I've selected the class, it's going to send all of those students the email that they've been added to the class. So that would be where you would have to go. They'd have to go to their email to check that. I'm going to go ahead and delete some of these crazy classes that I've got going on. Go ahead and just delete. I know that with creating and managing classes, it's definitely a lot. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of ways to do it. So it's really just what works best with your classroom setting, with the support that you have from your IT department and whatever restrictions or limitations that you might have regarding firewalls. So it might be a little bit of trial and error within your school to figure out what works best for you. I know that I did a lot with my class of 6th graders. I did everything manually. And then just added the information into like a Google Doc so that I had their username and their password. And I made so many copies because I knew I'd have the kid who would lose it. Right. So that's adding in, those are the 3 ways to add students into your classes. And we went through kind of what it looks like from the student perspective. The thing that I really love.
Danielle?
Oh, yeah.
Where do students go to log in?
So same login information. So I'll show you right over here. So I'm going to sign out. I'll sign in with my student account. So once they go to snow.live, they will sign in with the information that you've given them. So I have my, so it would be that just that simple information. They would log in with their email. They would have that password either sent, the one that you created or sent to them via their email. And then it says, hi, you're in the class. I already finished my homework. So this would be the student view of the dashboard. From their dashboard, it's very similar to your own dashboard where they have the option to change their information. So changing their password can be done through My Profile. So if you were going to go through and change your students' passwords before giving them their credentials, would start here. It has all their little info of things that I don't imagine your students would have. At the edit profile option, you can change their name. You can unclick so they don't receive email notification reports. And then here is where you can change their password. And you have the option to, if you would like to upload their profile picture. If there's a profile picture already associated with their Google account, so if you did Google Classroom to log your students in, that profile picture would likely appear too. So that's how students would be able to go and save that information. Or you as a teacher could change it. And then from there, students have access to the same dashboards that you do. They can go to the Explore page, and they can play all of the lessons that are within the community. They can also create their own lessons, which I think is a really fun feature. So they have access to the same lesson activity templates. So this would be really great. They can create their own lessons to demonstrate their understanding of new concept and contents. lesson activities just like you, anything that they've created. And then from the teacher point, the assignments. So this will show them any assessments that they've had, any gradable assignments, any lists that their teacher has sent out. So lists would be multiple lesson activities that they could play in a row, things that are practice and things that are gradable. So right now, and it keeps it all in a nice little category. So we can see this student completed one assignment. My student can see what their score was. They can also see what the correct answers, or what answers were incorrect, what were correct. And then the other really great option is if the teacher left any feedback. And I'll show that from the teacher perspective as well.
Danielle?
Yes.
I have 2 questions, please.
Sure.
First one from Carolyn says, if students are loaded with Google Classroom, can they just choose the sign in with Google option and skip the user password step, especially if we can get outside emails for elementary students?
That's a really good question. I think with single sign-on, that
They should be able to, right?
They should be able to.
Yeah.
I think that you would just need to then add them to your class.
So I've actually done that with my own account.
Okay,
just to
good.
test it, and it does work. So yeah, you should be able to just sign in that way. And Kimberly's asking, is there anything in the works for making the passwords accessible to the teacher? With younger kids, like first grade, it would be extremely helpful.
Jack, can you answer that one?
I don't know. Is there for making the passwords accessible to the teacher? So Danielle will be sending me a note about that tomorrow, and I will get with our developers and I will ask. How's that for an answer? And then we will let you all know as soon as we have an answer on one of the webinars. And then Danielle, we have another question that comes in, says, can Snowflake assignments be shared using Google Classroom, or can they only be assigned within Snowflake?
2-part. You can kind of do it both ways. So one way that you can do that, I'm going to go back to my teacher account. So obviously you can assign assignments through this, but once you've created an account for your students, one of the options that you have is sharing links. So if a student has a link, that basically means they have access to all of the lesson activities created and shared in the lesson community. So then I could then take any lesson from the community, and when I select lesson activity info, and this would be my own lessons as well, I can select the information for my own lessons that I've shared, and then I can provide that with a link, and I could simply share that link onto Google Classroom. So students would be able to play the lesson activity. What you would lose though by doing it this way versus doing it through the Snow.Live managing classes is if this were a gradable assessment, you're not going to be able to see the data. Students would just be able to play it like practice, but there's not a way to collect the data within Google Classroom. I hope that answered your question. All right, I'm gonna go back to my Snowflake teacher account. There we go. So I'll show what I mean by being able to send your own lesson activities. So, actually I haven't shared any to the community, so I don't have a link to be able to, I don't have any of that. So it's just lessons that I've played. Once I have sent assignments though to my students, I can see how my students have performed on that particular assignment. So there's a lot of old ones. This was the most recent one. So we were just on the student account. You got to see what the student view was after having completed that assignment. From the teacher account, it's going to show me, this was a gradable assessment. It's going to show me what class it was assigned to, the due date that I put for the class. It's also going to give me the average class score. There was only one student who did it. She did very poorly. And the average class time. And then for each individual student, it will break it down even further. So it'll show me my student, what their score was, how long they spent completing that assignment. And then I can open up and see specifically which ones did they answer incorrectly. And then I could also give my student feedback. So I could give them a personal note about, great job on numbers 1 through 5, make sure when you're on numbers this and that you do X, Y, and Z. So I can give personalized feedback to my student. And then once I've saved it, my student will then be able to see that feedback on their side. Before I go on to show how to send assignments to students, are there any questions?
Nope, go right ahead.
Okay, great. All right, so that was the one I shared before. So this is just a lesson activity that I grabbed from the community. It was a nice little fun math one. And I can, once I've played that lesson activity, this is the other thing I really love with Snow.live is once you play a lesson activity, it becomes yours and you have the ability to go through and I can edit the lesson. I can change information. I can change the description. So maybe I wanted my description to be instructions for my students. And then I can scaffold it if needed. And then I can send that lesson to my students. So from there, I can select which class I want to send it to. I can decide this is one that does have a gradable ability, so I can make this a gradable assessment, so then my students would get a score. Otherwise, it would just be practice. So they would be able to see which ones they're answering correctly or incorrectly, but there wouldn't be a final raw score with it. And then I can select which students I want to send it to. I also have the ability to add a due date. So when do I want this assignment completed by? And then it's sent out to my student. And then from my review progress portion, I can then see any students who have completed the assignments. So right now, no one, because I just sent it. So there's my one student. I can see that this student hasn't opened the assignment yet and therefore has no score or time. So I know that that was a lot and I know that that was really fast, but those are the 3 ways that you can create your classes and manage your students using Snow.live. So, and students can do this on any device. The students at my former district had Chromebooks. We had both touchscreen and not touchscreen. So when it was not a touchscreen, they just used their mouse pad and they were able to play the activity the same as if it were on an interactive panel. They just used their mouse to navigate instead. So, and then when they had touchscreens, it was the same thing. What I loved though is once I created the student accounts, I loved that my students were able to create their own lesson activities. We did this a lot with review. So I would have my students, I'm thinking of my 6th graders when we learned about ancient Egypt. We had a review where I assigned students, a chunk from their notebook, like from this section to this section, using this list of vocabulary, you have the following options, create a lesson activity. And we talked about what makes a good lesson, what can we do to change the backgrounds, what do we want to make sure that all of our information is correct. And it gave the students a chance to kind of demonstrate their knowledge. And then I allowed them to share it with me so then I could upload it onto my interactive panel. We just downloaded it onto USBs and then uploaded to my account. And I was able to have my students come up and play their activities in a class. So it was really great. They did peer review first, so they would play just with their Chromebooks and work in small groups. And then once we were pretty happy with it, we would save it and set up our board into different zones so that multiple students could play. So it was a really good way, not just for them to demonstrate their knowledge, but I also saw a lot of my students who maybe weren't the ones who would be more active and engaged in getting up in front of the class, having something that they felt pretty proud of and wanting their classmates to play their lesson activity. So it brought a couple of my kiddos out of their shell. I really liked that. And then we did a Christmas activity where we went into the 2nd grade classroom and we took their spelling words and we took the math concepts that they were learning in 2nd grade. And my students created holiday themed lesson activities. And then that week before Christmas, where it's usually like chaos and disorganized mess and everyone's ready for break, it was a great day to just go in and have my students teach the 2nd graders. And the 2nd grade teachers loved that because it gave them a little bit of a break too. So it was really fun stuff. It was all great that having my students being able to create their own accounts had opened up a lot of possibilities of what they could do. So I know that that's a lot. I'm gonna just double check if there's any other questions, or I'd love to hear too if you have any ideas or suggestions of how you'd like to have your own students creating lessons or ways that you could see incorporating that in your classroom. We'd love any feedback of what you're doing and how it's working for you.
So Angela said these are great ideas, thank you. And I just have to say, Angela's always very polite. Every time she asks a question we answer, she says thank you. So she's always very polite. Thank you, Angela. I would like to take a second and ask also for everyone that's on the webinar listening this evening. We are continuing to have webinars each week, as you know, and I would love to get your ideas of things that you think you would like to hear about. So we've come up with a list, obviously, that we've been talking to you about. But if there's something in particular that you would like in a webinar, if you could email that to me at jr@nuitec.com. I would love to hear your ideas of what would be helpful to you. Even if it's something where it would be a very short webinar and we could do a few short topics at one time. Just, we would like to be responsive to you and provide you with the information that you need. Another thing that I would like to say is, once we finished covering the topic, we plan on having a couple of moments like now, waiting to see if there are any questions that come in. If they're not, we respect your time and we will not stay on the webinar for the entire hour just to have an hour taken up, because I understand we've all worked in schools and we understand that coming home and having time with your family is sometimes rare, or you might need to go grade papers or do a lesson plan for tomorrow. So I'll give a couple of more seconds for any questions that might come in. While I'm waiting, I want to go ahead and thank Danielle for her time tonight. I think this probably was one of the most high interest webinars because the questions were flying in this evening, which is very good. So I apologize that you may have had to wait a couple of moments to get answers to your questions, but I am very thankful that so many people were asking questions.
Yes, I'm super grateful for the questions too, because it's giving me a different perspective. I've been out of the classroom for the last year, so I haven't been using this in the same capacity. So seeing these questions is giving me a chance to reflect on, like, oh, okay, how does that work a little bit? And I'm very appreciative of that, because your questions help me find the answers and it helps me make doing my job a lot easier.
And thank you very much, Danielle. I appreciate it. And Kelly, I would like to thank you, because in the background with some of the questions that you don't see, she's been answering questions to other people that didn't get asked in public because they were more specific. So thank you, Kelly. So
absolutely. Thank you guys for attending.
So everyone, thank you. Have a great evening. Danielle, thank you. Have a great evening, and we will see you next week.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.